Welcome to the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in critical times. Here's your host, Bill Kelly.
And welcome another edition of the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in these very critical times. I'm your host, Bill Kelly. It's good to have you with us again. Yeah, I am fascinated by watching the reaction and the fallout, I suppose, from Canada's election, which we know, of course, resulted in a Liberal minority government. Mark Carney is still the Prime Minister and will be for, well, the next little while anyway. We don't know how much longer this Parliament's going to do, but I'm going to touch on that in just a couple of minutes. But even on election night, in the concession speeches by Mr. Singh and Mr. Poilievre, and the general tone from some of the other folks, winners and losers, was, you know what, it's time to set these differences aside. Let's all work together as Canadians for the common good of making Canada a better country, yada, yada, yada. And that's, I guess, what you're supposed to say after an election. You know, hope springs eternal that, okay, maybe they're going to go back to Ottawa, and that will be the prevailing attitude, that, okay, we can agree to disagree, but we don't have to be idiots about it. Well, checking from some of the comments I've seen from some of the people that have been winners and losers from the political side, and certainly on social media from some of the people that were strongly supportive of a couple of the opposition parties, that kumbaya moment is not going to happen anytime soon. There's still a lot of bitterness, a lot of, hey, what the hell were Canadians thinking, that sort of thing, from people that are just disenchanted with the results. You know, the spoiler alert here, guys, it's a democracy. You're not always going to get what you want. But as Mick Jagger says, but sometimes you get what you need. Right now, we needed somebody who could stand up to Donald Trump, and that was Mark Carney. It was not Pierre Poilievre. And even though the Conservatives, I think, made some incredible gains and surprising gains, especially in Ontario, they don't like Pierre Poilievre. And Canadians, I think, by and large, at least the majority of us anyway, figured that, okay, Poilievre is not the guy to deal with Trump and with the trade policies and the tariff policies. Carney is. Now, we'll see how this plays out in the next little while. But what's interesting about this, though, is after the election, and I'll tie this into our Canadian way of thinking right now, too. We're into hockey playoffs, and as we do this podcast today, the Montreal Canadiens got eliminated last night. The Leafs and Ottawa are banging it out right now, but one of those Canadian teams isn't going to be there. But as teams get knocked out of the playoffs, invariably what happens is there has to be some sort of analysis. Okay, what went right? What went wrong? Do we need to make major changes? Well, in politics, you have to do the same thing. And if you don't, you do it at your own peril, because, I mean, Canadians have spoken right now, and it's up to the political parties to, I guess, discern exactly what that message is and what they need to do, if anything, going forward. And we'll start, first of all, with the Conservative Party. And it bears repeating, and I know it's an open wound right now for Conservatives, but they blew it. They had an over 20-point lead just a few months ago, and everybody thought this was going to be a cakewalk for Pierre Poilievre to become the Prime Minister. Some were suggesting with one of the largest majority governments in the history of this country. Well, we don't need to remind anybody that, of course, that didn't happen. And Poilievre himself did not get reelected in his own riding in Carleton. So what do the Conservatives do? Well, judging from what I'm hearing from some of the Conservative hierarchy and some of the Conservatives that did get reelected, they're not thinking they need to do a whole lot of anything here. We increased our seat total, and the popular vote numbers seem to be, very happy, and we're great with that. So maybe not much of anything. I caution Conservatives and Conservative supporters, you've got to dig a little deeper in your analysis to understand just what went wrong, because you didn't win. And you didn't win by a large margin. Forget about the final totals, and that you increased your total. You should have kicked butt in this election, and you didn't. And you've got to ask yourself, why not? And if you're going to be honest about this when you're answering these questions, why not? That first answer has got to be Pierre Poilievre. A lot of Canadians, most Canadians, just don't like the guy. He's abrasive. He rubs people the wrong way. He's smug. He's got this attitude that I think just a lot of Canadians just could not get to. We don't necessarily have to love our leader, but we have to respect them and at least like them and have some confidence in them. And I don't think a lot of Canadians have that with Poilievre. So what do they do with him? He's lost his seat. The indication seems to be at this stage to follow a pattern that has happened in past elections, federally and provincially, that if a leader is defeated, then somebody who did win has to step aside, resign their seat, and there will be a by-election, and Poilievre will run in that by-election and theoretically win, and of course then he's back in Parliament, and he can be the opposition leader from whatever that riding is going to be. That takes time. And right now, I'm sure there's a lot of phone calls going on behind closed doors in Conservative headquarters saying, okay, who's going to do this? Who's going to step up? And it's not as easy as it might sound. I mean, let's face it, if somebody's just gone through an election, spent a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to get elected, the party to turn around and say, "Hey, congratulations, that was great. By the way, can you resign now so our leader can take your seat?" It's a tough call, and a lot of people are going to say, "No, I'm sorry, rather not." There has to be a carrot given to a lot of these people, and if you're not in power, it's pretty difficult. It's not as if you can go find themselves a government job or something like this. There has to be something sugar-coated for that individual who's going to give it up, whether it's a job in the private sector. Or, let's face it, the Conservatives know a lot of people in the business world. We may never find out exactly what it is, but it's negotiations that are going on right now to make that determination. We hear it might be a seat somewhere in the Edmonton area that's pretty safe for Conservatives there, and Poilievre may win a by-election. But even that, it takes time. You have to call the by-election. That's up to the Prime Minister. I think, got 6 months to do it. And then, of course, there's the by-election itself and the campaign, the mini-campaign for the by-election. So even the pundits that are assuming that this is what's going to happen are looking at it right now and figuring it could well be into next year before Poilievre were to actually get a seat back in the House of Commons, if in fact that were to happen. Of course, the other option here is, do they look for another leader? And I know that publicly, no Conservative is saying that. They're saying all the right things right now. No, that he's our guy, he's our leader, and he inspired Canadians. I would like to argue about that, but that's what they're saying right now, at least publicly. But on the other hand, if there's a strong feeling that Poilievre was the main reason why the Conservatives didn't win that election, and he's not in Parliament right now, is this an opportunity for them to say, "Pierre, thanks a lot, see you later," okay, and go and find somebody else to lead the party? I know that's extreme, but you have to think of what's going to happen here. It's going to be a tough decision. I don't think they're going to go that way. I don't know how many disenchanted Conservatives there are right now, but you got to look at the track record here. And this is, as the Conservatives are wringing their hands right now and saying, Canadians have got a fourth term of Liberal government. Why? Conservatives, you have to accept part of the blame for what's going on here. The Trudeau re-elections were head scratchers for an awful lot of people. I think there's a lot more credibility for Mark Carney to get elected here, because I think most Canadians did accept the fact that Carney is change. The problems the people in this country had with the Liberals was Justin Trudeau. Leaders can make or break a political party, especially when you've got somebody like Trudeau was, and certainly Poilievre is, or at least was when he was still a member of Parliament, where it's pretty much a one-man show. Yeah, there's a support team, but most Canadians don't even know their names. It's all about the leader, the leader, the leader. Well, if the leader's not leading you, then something's got to be done. We'll see what happens in the days and weeks ahead as to just how the Conservatives are going to try to deal with that. My guess is there's probably going to be a by-election. Somebody will step down and he'll run for that by-election, which, by the way, is not a guarantee. The Progressive Conservative Party in Ontario had a similar conundrum some years ago when John Tory became the leader of the Progressive Conservative Party here in Ontario, and he had to run in a by-election. And they chose one out in Peterborough, Lindsay, in the area out there, and he lost, much to the shock of John Tory and an awful lot of other people. And that basically was his career in politics coming to an abrupt end. He got out of the business, got into broadcasting, as a matter of fact, and did quite well on that for the longest time before he decided to get back into it at the municipal level, and of course was the mayor of Toronto for quite some time. So decisions to be made there. The NDP is a different story. Jagmeet Singh also lost his seat. He did not get reelected in his riding out in British Columbia, and resigned right after that. He didn't have to resign as an MP. The public did that for him, but he also resigned as leader of the party. So they're going to pick somebody else. And of course, the NDP got decimated in this election. They're down to only about 7 seats right now. So where do they go? They've got to do some soul searching. And when you go from 20 odd seats down to 7 seats and you get your leader blown out, you're not looking at tweaking things here. You got to understand, is this a major reconstruction? Do you blow everything up and just start all over again? And I don't know that they have the will to do that. But at the same time, if they ever want to get back on their feet politically, do they go that way? I mean, there's some serious questions the NDP have to ask themselves right now. Like, who are they? What do they stand for? And what do Canadians think of the NDP? I know that when it was born, way back in the early 1960s, when this iteration came along from Tommy Douglas and so many others, I don't want to get too deeply into the history there. They were the party of the working man, working woman, but mostly in those days, the farmers, of course. That's where this whole party was born, out in the prairie provinces in Saskatchewan and Alberta. And of course, they adopted the working man, the tradespeople, the steel workers, the dock workers, etc. And it did them pretty well. I mean, they obviously have never formed a government on the federal level, but closest they came was when Jack Layton actually became the opposition leader, but they've fallen off since then. And part of the reason for that is, are they still significant? Are they relevant to Canadian voters? Party of the working man, the working people in this country. But both the Liberals and Conservatives have reached out, and I think successfully in a lot of circumstances, and tapped into that. Some of the labor unions, some of the biggest unions in this country right now are supporters of the Liberal or Conservative Party, sometimes both. Doug Ford did an outstanding job of reaching out to unions and trade unions and especially union leaders to garner support here in the province of Ontario. And I know that hardcore Conservatives are saying, well, he doesn't even govern like a Conservative. But like I said on a previous podcast, but he's governing. So maybe you should learn from him about how to reach out and how to increase your base and how to increase your vote totals. I don't know if the NDP have the courage nor the ability to do something like that. I'm always reminded of a story in the UK. I mean, the Labour Party there was kind of the equivalent of our NDP here. And they were in power. Harold Wilson and others have been prime minister years ago. But they fell on hard times and just didn't seem to be able to swing enough public support to gain office. And along comes Tony Blair, and he becomes leader of the party. And he basically asked them a question. And he talks about this in the book that he wrote some years ago, and said, basically, do you want to stick to these principles that you think are so foundational, or do you want to win? Because you got a choice, and you probably can't have both. I mean, and they decided, okay, fine, what do you got in mind? And he moved the party much more to the center than the Labour Party had ever been before, still representative of some of those other things. And they won government, as we know. Now, we can argue about how effective a Prime Minister Tony Blair was. That's for a debate for another day. I don't want to get into that today. But he led his party to victory. And in politics, if what your main goal is to simply say, I want to adhere to these principles and this is what we're going to do and we're not going to waver from this, you're not going to get elected. That's all there is to it. You've got to say, how do we win? And I don't know that the NDP are asking themselves that question. By the way, it's a variation on the same theme of what the Conservatives are thinking right now, too. I think there's an opportunity here for them to reevaluate themselves. I mean, we've been talking for years, ever since Stephen Harper took over this party many, many years ago, after the amalgamation, as it were, of the Reform Party and the Progressive Conservative Party. An awful lot of people that I know who were conservatives or right-leaning are not comfortable with Stephen Harper, Andrew Scheer, and now Poilievre's version of conservatism. Far too radical, far too to the right, and just not comfortable with it. And maybe Canadians aren't either. I mean, these guys have just lost 4 elections in a row. At least 3 of them that most people and most pundits thought were in the bag, that they were going to win. Well, they didn't. So do the Conservatives have to reevaluate just who they are? Do they have to be kinder, gentler? The Brian Mulroney kind of Conservatives, to appeal to a much broader base than these people seem to be doing right now? Or are they simply going to say, yeah, with this close, I wouldn't change anything? Well, if you don't change anything, you've got to ask yourself, what's the future? Are Canadians going to change their minds? That's really not a very viable political philosophy or theory to have. So there's some tough decisions for both of these parties going forward right now. It doesn't have to be overnight, and it doesn't even have to be something that they're going to, have a big, a conference and have the media there and say, this is the new party, this is the revamped party. You do it incrementally, and you do it subtly, really, and people will notice the difference in the passage of time, if, in fact, you want to do that. And I'm going to be fascinated to watch how both of these parties respond to what's going on, because I don't believe, as some people are saying on social media these days, especially these are clearly conservative supporters, that this minority government's not going to last very long. I think it is. First of all, the NDP are not going to bring down the government. They're a party in disarray. They're a party that's on their deathbed right now. They don't have a leader. They don't want an election. Canadians certainly don't want an election. Heaven help any political party, and including you Conservatives, that try to bring down this government in the next little while and try to force another elections. I can tell you, political history dictates you will be punished if you do that. Now, that puts an awful lot of pressure on Mark Carney and the Liberal Party to deliver. And we'll be watching that as we go along over the next couple of months, because that's obviously one of the major challenges for them. Canadians basically made a choice between Poilievre and Carney. Who can lead us through this problem area that we're in right now? Who can lead us forward? And they chose Mark Carney. And we'll follow how the Prime Minister carries out some of those policies. We're going to talk about that in a podcast in just a couple of days, too, about what's going to be happening with the Carney and his meeting with Donald Trump. We'll leave it there for now, but more to come on this, as they say in our business. That's it for this edition of the Bill Kelly Podcast. You can catch us, of course, on Substack, Spotify, Apple, of course, on YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. By the way, if you are watching on YouTube, don't forget to hit the notification bell, too, to spread the word here. A lot of response on Blue Sky, too. Thank you for this. Always, of course, look forward to your responses and your reaction to the podcast. Keep those coming as well. Until next time, I'm Bill Kelly. Stay in touch and stay informed.
Bill Kelly Podcast brought to you by Wizen's Law, personal injury lawyers. Listen, you didn't choose to get injured, but you can choose the right lawyer. Wizen's Law, 905-522-1102 or wizenslaw.com.